After my parents disappeared on vacation, my boss demoted me to a janitor and laughed in front of the whole office. Maybe mopping floors runs in your bloodline. He mocked. Sunday afternoon, the CEO's son visited and said, "Wait, you're the one my dad's been searching for." Gasps echoed through the halls. "You know, this is probably illegal," Caleb said, half whispering as he stared at the empty executive floor. I leaned on the mop handle, sweat clinging to the collar of my uniform. "You think? Try telling that to Aldrich." I got demoted mid-leave after my parents disappeared. His eyebrows shot up. "You never said they were missing." I nodded. "Vanished. No trace. Portugal. And now I clean toilets while Aldrich parades interns around like he's the next Bezos." He squinted at me, puzzled. "Wait. Minter? Your Minter? What's left of him?" "Yeah." Caleb backed up, almost stumbling. "Holy shit. You're the guy my dad's been trying to find." 3 months earlier, I was a financial analyst at Harristone Global, a sprawling investment firm based in Seattle. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, which was enough for me. I was finally making progress, an upcoming promotion, recognition from upper management, and a decent rhythm in my life. Then came the phone call. My parents, Harold and Nora Minter, had taken a long overdue trip to Portugal. It was their first time abroad since their honeymoon, and they were beyond excited. Every day before they left, my mom sent me screenshots of their itinerary, from Lisbon to Faro, rental cars, beachfront Airbnbs. They were glowing. On the third day of their trip, they stopped responding. No calls. No texts. No check-ins on our shared app. At first, I told myself they were just enjoying their time, disconnecting. But by day 5, my gut told me something was wrong. I called the embassy. Local police. I bought a last-minute ticket and flew out. I arrived in Portugal with barely any information and even fewer leads. The last place they were seen was a small coastal village near Lagos. Locals remembered them, friendly, cheerful, drinking wine by the sea. But then they were just gone. Their rental car was found parked near a cliff, untouched. No signs of struggle. No belongings missing. Their passports were left in their room. The police were helpful, but it was clear they had nothing. Days turned into weeks. My vacation days ran out. I stayed another 2 weeks unpaid, walking through markets with their photos, visiting hospitals, checking shelters. I filed reports. Nothing. When I returned to Seattle, I was numb. My mind was still somewhere on the cliffs of southern Portugal, playing out scenarios. But back at the office, no one seemed to care. I showed up early Monday morning, badge around my neck, wearing the same suit I'd left in. The receptionist barely looked up. My keycard didn't work. I was met by security at the elevator. "There's been a reorganization," the guard said. They escorted me to a closet-sized room in the basement. A janitor's cart was waiting. I didn't understand. I asked to speak to Eldrick Hurst, my supervisor, the guy I'd reported to for 3 years. He didn't even try to pretend he cared. I found him in the break room, sipping espresso and surrounded by junior analysts. When he saw me, he grinned. "Well, look who's back," he said, loud enough for the interns to hear. "I hope you brought your mop. Maybe cleaning floors is in your bloodline." I stared at him, speechless. No explanation. No paperwork. Just a mop, a sneer, and a roomful of laughter. I tried HR. They said there'd been an anonymous report about an error I made on a high-profile client's account. A serious breach of fiduciary conduct. When I asked for details, they cited confidentiality. I knew it was false. I'd never touched that client's portfolio. But while I was grieving, gone, unreachable, someone had taken my silence as an opportunity. I couldn't afford to quit. With my parents missing and no word from abroad, their bills, insurance, the shop they ran, their mortgage, all fell to me. I took the janitor job because I had no choice. So I scrubbed toilets in the same building where I once presented quarterly growth strategies. The same people I helped train a year ago wouldn't make eye contact with me now. I was invisible. Or worse, disposable. Until the Sunday Caleb walked in. He wasn't what I expected a CEO's son to look like: hoodie, joggers, sneakers that probably cost more than my rent. He was wandering the top floor, waiting for his dad to finish a meeting when he saw me buffing the hallway floor. He blinked a few times, then tilted his head like he was trying to recognize a face from a blurry photo. "Wait, Minter?" he said. I turned, assuming he was mocking me too. "Yeah. You need a spill cleaned up or something?" But his expression changed. It wasn't derision, it was shock. He pulled out his phone, tapped something, and showed me an image. It was a photo from the internal directory 2 years ago. Me, smiling, standing beside a whiteboard after presenting a strategy plan. I remembered that day. He said, "My dad's been looking for this guy for months. Didn't know the name, just had the photo." "That's you." I didn't know what to say. Caleb asked if I had time to talk. I said I was technically on duty, but no one was around. He explained that Cormac Dawes, his father, the CEO, had been reviewing old accounts after suspecting some irregularities. In one file, there was mention of a junior analyst who flagged unusual transactions but was never followed up with. The file had been tampered with. Caleb said they'd been trying to identify the analyst ever since. Apparently, Cormac suspected internal fraud, serious, ongoing, and orchestrated at a high level. The only person who'd gotten close to connecting the dots? Me. And then I disappeared off the corporate radar. Caleb said his father believed I had found something, or was about to, when I suddenly left. But he never knew why I was gone. No one told him I went on emergency leave. Aldrich never reported it. When I told Caleb the real reason I left, the disappearance of my parents, he went pale. He asked if I'd ever connected their disappearance to the company. I hadn't. Not until that moment. Because now, everything felt different. The shop my parents ran back in Boise, Minter's Memories, always felt odd. It wasn't just an antique store. They were private about some customers. Some items. I remember once seeing my dad handle an old watch with white gloves and mutter something about never letting this one go to the wrong hands. But I was young. I never thought much of it. Caleb asked if I still had access to the shop. I did. Barely. I was months behind on the lease, and the landlord was threatening to change the locks. But I still had the keys. He asked me to go back. Said it might be important. So that night, I got in my car and drove 8 hours back to Boise. And that's where the next part of this story begins. I got into Boise a little after 2 a.m., parked in front of the shop, and just sat there in the silence. The street was empty, just the orange glow of the street lamps casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Minter's Memories looked exactly the same as it did before my parents left for Portugal. Like they'd just stepped out for a coffee run. I hadn't been back since their disappearance. I wasn't ready to deal with it. Their absence felt heavier inside that store. Every dusty photo frame, every old record, every creaking floorboard carried a piece of them. But Caleb's words stuck with me: it might be important. I unlocked the door, walked in, and was hit with the smell of aged wood and time itself. Nothing had been touched. The last display they arranged was still intact: an antique phonograph, a pair of white gloves beside it, and an old travel trunk underneath. My mom's handwriting still labeled the tag: British Colonial Trunk, circa 1900. Origin unknown. I walked past the main floor and into the back room, the one that was always locked when I was a kid. It was never off limits in a way that felt suspicious, more like private. Important. I used to imagine there were rare coins and cursed heirlooms back there. And maybe there were. Now, I had the key. Inside, it looked more like a study than storage. A big desk sat in the center, piled with yellowed maps, binders, and carefully catalogued ledgers. On the wall, there was a corkboard covered in pinned notes, photographs, newspaper clippings. Some were in Portuguese. Others were faded sketches of art pieces I didn't recognize. In one corner, I saw a photo of my dad, younger, standing with a group of people I'd never seen before in front of a building in Vienna. My stomach sank as I realized none of this had anything to do with antiques. I pulled out one of the drawers in the desk and found a sealed manila envelope labeled, "If anything happens." My name was written across the back in my mother's cursive. Hands shaking, I opened it. Inside was a short letter. "Eli, if you're reading this, it means we didn't make it home. We're sorry. We wanted to tell you everything, but we didn't want you pulled into it. Not until it was safe. The truth is, we were part of a network tracing and repatriating lost cultural property. After World War II, entire collections of art, wealth, and records were stolen, hidden, or trafficked. Some of that ended up here, in the States. We worked quietly with people across Europe and South America. And recently, we found something big. A trail that led back to Harristone. Your firm. It wasn't a coincidence you ended up there. It was the one piece we could never access. But you did. We just didn't realize how close you got. Be careful. Don't trust anyone until you know who they are. We love you." Mom and Dad. I sat there with the letter for what felt like an hour, the hum of the fridge in the shop's tiny kitchenette the only sound around me. My head was spinning. I remembered the random project I'd been assigned last year. An audit of overseas charitable funds. I flagged a strange transaction from a supposedly defunct European subsidiary, some trust fund that moved millions into what looked like shell charities. I brought it to Aldrich. He told me it was an error and that he'd follow up. He didn't. I dropped it. I had no idea it could have been connected to something this big. In the bottom of the envelope was a USB drive. I plugged it into my laptop, and dozens of files opened: spreadsheets, names, paintings, serial numbers, export records. Many were labeled restitution pending. Others were marked high risk. But some had been traced to investment portfolios linked back to Harristone. My parents weren't just antique dealers. They were tracking looted cultural property and trying to expose where it ended up. I hardly slept that night. I spent hours scanning through files, cross-referencing names. In one spreadsheet, I found the name Dawes Trust repeated. Alongside it, internal link suspected. Key account custodian unknown. That was the CEO's name. Cormac Dawes. I called Caleb the next morning. Told him what I'd found. He was silent for a long time before saying, "You need to bring it to my dad. Today." I drove back to Seattle with everything: the letter, the USB, the files. I didn't even stop for gas until the light was blinking. All I could think about was the look on Aldrich's face when he saw me walk through those front doors again. But I didn't go to Aldrich. I went straight to the top. Cormac Dawes was nothing like his son. He was formal, rigid, with the kind of voice that made everyone else in the room shut up. He looked at me for a long time when I introduced myself. Said nothing when I handed him the letter and USB. He asked me to sit down and called in his assistant. "Clear the afternoon," he said. "Now." Then he turned to me. "Tell me everything. Start from Portugal." So I did. By the time I finished, the sun was setting outside his office. Cormac hadn't moved the entire time. Then, quietly, he said, "You have no idea how far this goes." He explained that over the last few years, he'd been working in the background, trying to clean up what Harristone had become. Somewhere along the way, things had twisted. Former board members and powerful partners had buried illicit assets, things that didn't belong in a modern institution. "I've been trying to trace the web," he said. "I never thought it would lead back to your family." He asked if I had proof that Aldrich had falsified the audit that got me demoted. I told him about Lucas and IT, the backups, the timestamp inconsistencies. He nodded slowly. "That's enough to start." He told me to go home, lay low, and wait. That he'd handle the rest. When I asked what rest meant, he didn't elaborate. I went home that night, exhausted but alert, like something huge was about to happen. I was right. 2 days later, Aldrich was walked out of the building in handcuffs. So were 2 other directors. It hit the news the next morning: fraud investigation, internal probe, financial misconduct. And my name? Nowhere in the article. Which was exactly how Cormac said it would be. He called me into his office privately. Told me the company owed me. Said I could name any position. That if I wanted to stay, he'd make it happen. I didn't answer right away. Because something else was pulling at me. And then, I got the letter. It arrived with no return address. The envelope was handwritten. My name. Just that. Inside was a single page: "Don't come looking. We're safe. And we're proud of you. Keep going." Mom, I stared at that note for a long time. There was no postmark. No hint of location. But it was her handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. They were alive. Somewhere. The letter stayed with me everywhere I went. Folded neatly in the inner pocket of my jacket, like some kind of tether to them. I read it again and again, especially when the weight of everything threatened to crush me, those long months of uncertainty, humiliation, and isolation. It didn't matter how brief the note was. It told me what I needed to know: they were out there. Alive. And not by accident. I didn't return to Harristone right away. Cormac had kept his promise. Aldrich was gone, stripped of his title, and soon after, indicted. 2 others followed. My name never came up in the public releases, but behind the scenes, I knew I was being whispered about. Some people sent me messages apologizing, saying they didn't know the full story. Others stayed quiet. I preferred the silence. I stayed away from the firm for a week, holed up in a quiet motel outside Olympia, combing through every file on the USB drive. There were hundreds, some tied to art pieces, others to names I didn't recognize. Some folders were encrypted. I passed what I could to Cormac's internal team, but I kept copies. Something told me I'd need them. It was during one of those nights, buried in spreadsheets and scanned letters, that I found a name that caught my attention: Julius Fry. It appeared multiple times. Once in a customs document, once in an old scanned manifest, and again in an email archive from a Harristone Europe office. The emails were vague, coded, but Julius Fry was identified as a sensitive partner. I remembered that name from my childhood. My dad mentioned him once, just in passing. Fry used to collect things that weren't his, he said. That was it. Just a comment while he was organizing a shipment. I didn't realize at the time, but that was his way of saying someone was dangerous. I tried to look Fry up. No LinkedIn. No social media. The only hits I got were buried in obscure art dealer forums and a few financial trade publications from the 90s, mostly in German. An independent broker. Private collections. Lawsuits that vanished mid-trial. A ghost in the industry. I flagged it for Cormac. He called me within the hour. We've been looking at him too, he said. He's connected to people who don't like questions. We think he's part of the group your parents were chasing. That was the first time he mentioned them like that, as investigators. Like they had a mission. Like they weren't just antique shop owners with an eye for history, but people trying to right wrongs that no one else cared about. I told Cormac I wanted in. Not the company. Not a promotion. I wanted the truth. I wanted to finish what my parents started. He didn't argue. He assigned someone from his private office, a woman named Dina Vukovic. Croatian. Former cultural attaché turned asset recovery consultant. She didn't say much the first time we met, just handed me a flash drive and said, "Start here." The files she gave me made my head spin. Some of the names I'd seen in the USB files were now linked to international auctions, museum holdings, even family estates. Items long thought lost. But they weren't lost. They were buried in shell companies, hidden through decades of laundering, and tucked into clean portfolios, some of them managed, coincidentally or not, through firms like Harris Tone. Dina told me something that stuck: sometimes, the trail is disguised as business. But theft is theft. Even when it's done with a contract. One painting in particular, a post-war oil piece labeled Untitled Woman, 1941, stood out. It appeared in several internal memos within Harris Tone, and had been transferred multiple times through clients connected to a Swiss subsidiary. The last known location? A private collector in Vancouver. When I brought that up, Dina's face tightened. Your parents were trying to recover that, she said. They traced it just before they left for Portugal. That was the moment it hit me. Portugal wasn't a vacation. It was a mission. They had traced something, someone, and gone to meet with them. But something had gone wrong. Or maybe, something had gone right, and they needed to vanish. I didn't know which. I started compiling everything. Creating a personal map. Names. Artifacts. Transfers. Offshore accounts. I wasn't an investigator by trade, but I had a data analyst's mind and the blood of two antique shop owners who clearly weren't just dealers. As I built out the timeline, it all kept pointing back to a tight web of actors. 5 names kept showing up. Julius Fry was one. Another was a woman named Anika Tauber, an art appraiser from Monaco. Then there was the Ambridge Foundation, a charity group with no real charity records. And 2 offshore banks, one in Liechtenstein, another in the Cayman Islands. Everything about it screamed cover-up. Dina and I started working late nights, often off the record. Cormac knew, but didn't interfere. He just said, "Be careful. These people don't play by the same rules." Then, one night, I got a call from a Portuguese number. Unknown. I let it go to voicemail, heart racing. The message was short. A woman's voice, barely above a whisper. Eli, it's not safe. Stop following the trail. They're watching. Please. Click. It wasn't my mom's voice. But whoever she was, she knew my name. She knew what I was doing. And she knew more than she was saying. I forwarded the voicemail to Dina. She didn't seem surprised. We've stirred the water, she said. 2 days later, someone broke into the Boise shop. The police said it looked like a professional job. No fingerprints, no forced entry. They bypassed the alarm, avoided the cameras. They took 3 specific ledgers, nothing else. Left behind cash, electronics, even a rare gold pocket watch that would have fetched $5,000 at auction. Whoever it was knew exactly what they were looking for. It made me more determined. My parents were alive. Somewhere. And the same people who made them disappear were now trying to scare me off. I stayed in Boise for a week after the break-in. Mostly because I didn't trust that whoever had gone through the shop wouldn't come back. I reinforced the locks, updated the security system, and installed hidden cameras of my own. I didn't sleep much. Every creak of the old floorboards at night had me reaching for my phone, ready to check the footage. The break-in wasn't random. Whoever did it had knowledge. They knew exactly which 3 ledgers to take, and more importantly, what to leave behind to make it look like a standard burglary. I sent the camera footage to Dina. There wasn't much, just a blur on one lens and total blackness on the others. Wiped or jammed. She said it looked like military-grade tech. That's when I knew I was out of my depth. Back in Seattle, I moved out of my apartment and into a short-term rental. Paranoia had started to settle in. I didn't want to take chances. I used a different route to work every day, never parked in the same spot twice, and stopped using the same cafe I'd gone to for years. Dina insisted it was necessary. Cormac, for his part, remained quiet but supportive. He checked in occasionally, but I could tell he was under pressure too. The fallout from the arrests hadn't fully settled, and whispers about more internal corruption were starting to circle. One morning, I opened my inbox to a string of flagged emails from an anonymous address. They were brief and cryptic, but attached were scanned documents, ledgers I hadn't seen, some of them referencing accounts I thought were closed years ago. The sender only signed off with one word: continuer. Portuguese. Continue. I forwarded them to Dina. A few hours later, she called me, voice lower than usual. "Who sent those to you?" "No idea. No trace." "You're being watched," she said. "And tested." "What does that mean?" "It means someone inside that circle is either trying to warn you or bait you. Either way, we need to be careful with what we touch next." But I couldn't stop. I kept digging. I started visiting small galleries, quietly asking questions, posing as a researcher compiling a private catalog. I figured if the art pieces my parents were tracing were still moving, someone local had seen them. That's how I found Camilla. She ran a small gallery in Vancouver's Kitsilano district. I walked in on a rainy Wednesday and asked about a particular piece, Untitled Woman, 1941, just to test the waters. I hadn't even finished the title when she looked at me sharply and said, "Who sent you?" "No one," I said. "I'm trying to trace its movement. It belonged to a family in Poland before the war. I think it surfaced again recently." She went quiet, then disappeared into the back for almost 10 minutes. I almost left, thinking she'd called the cops or someone worse. When she returned, she handed me a folder. Inside were photographs, private collection snapshots of the painting in different homes, years apart. Some notes. A shipping manifest from 2019. It had passed through a temporary holding foundation based in Geneva. The receiving party? The Ambridge Foundation. "They're the cleaners," Camilla said. "They whitewash the pieces and funnel them back into the market through legal auctions." I keep my distance. "But I remember your mother." That made me freeze. "She came in here a few years ago," Camilla said. "Didn't give her name, but I recognized the accent." "Same as yours." She asked the same thing. "About that painting." She said it wasn't about the art, it was about what was behind it. "What does that mean?" She said the painting had a seal. On the back. Hidden. With numbers. I'd never heard about a seal. Camilla told me she'd tried to reach out later, but the number she had stopped working. She assumed the woman, my mother, had left the country. It started to become clear, the painting wasn't just art. It was a key. Or a code. And if my parents had traced it to Portugal, maybe that's where the trail broke, or where they had to disappear to protect what they found. I updated Dina that night. She said we needed to find out who currently owned the painting. That's when things escalated. 2 days later, I received a package at my rental. No return address. Inside, a single photograph of my parents. Taken in Portugal. They were walking down a street. Smiling. Behind them, standing in the shadow of a doorway, was a man in a black coat and sunglasses. Not facing the camera, but something about him felt intentional. Like he knew he was being captured. There was a note with the photo. "Still want to keep going?" I took it straight to Dina. She looked at the photo, then at me. "They're playing chess now. You moved. They're warning you not to take the next step." "I'm not stopping." I figured. She made a few calls I wasn't privy to. The next morning, I was on a flight, destination undisclosed until I landed in Lisbon. She met me at the airport. "Time to retrace their last steps," she said. "And see what they left behind." The next week was a blur of alleyways, dusty records, and conversations with people who didn't want to be remembered. We visited the beachside cafe where my parents were last seen, the guest house they stayed in, and even the chapel overlooking the cliffs where their car was found. At the chapel, I noticed something. A symbol etched into one of the pews. Faint, but deliberate. A circle with 3 lines running through it. I'd seen it before, on one of the files in my dad's ledger. It was a marker. Dina confirmed it. That's how they used to signal safe meeting places, she said. Someone left this for someone else. Maybe your parents. Maybe someone after them. We sat in silence, the ocean wind rattling the chapel doors. They had been here. They were still leaving breadcrumbs. And we were getting closer. Dina and I stayed in Portugal for another week. The more we dug, the clearer it became, my parents hadn't just disappeared, they had vanished themselves. They'd gone off-grid on purpose, and every step they'd taken before that was carefully calculated. The breadcrumb trail they left wasn't random. It was a message, but also a challenge. At the heart of it all was that painting, Untitled Woman, 1941. And the symbol on the chapel pew? It appeared again on the back of a shipping invoice we found buried in the archives of a local art museum. Hidden in the margins, under an ink wash, was a string of numbers, February 21st, 3917. A date. February 21st, 1937. Or maybe 21st of February, 2039? Dina shook her head. It's not a date, she said. It's a vault code. A location marker. She was right. We tracked it to a storage facility near the Lisbon docks, a place my parents had rented under a pseudonym for years. Inside the unit, hidden beneath tarps and crates of what looked like mundane items, old clocks, chipped ceramics, photo albums, was a large wooden crate with a Harristone seal from 1978. Not even the new Harristone. This was something grandfathered from the original founding family. Forgotten. Or buried on purpose. Inside the crate was a collection of ledgers, paintings, and even jewelry, all items documented in the Stolen Cultural Properties list. Many still bore faint traces of original ownership labels. The kind the war never erased. But most shocking of all, a thick binder full of financial records, transfers, and correspondence, all linking Julius Fry and the Ambridge Foundation directly to fraudulent acquisitions. A paper trail that detailed decades of laundering looted artifacts through major investment firms, including Harristone, and slowly legitimizing their ownership. But here's the catch, many of those artifacts had already been returned quietly. My parents had orchestrated it behind the scenes. They didn't want the recognition, they wanted the restitution. Now, we had the files. Proof of fraud, money laundering, and cover-up spanning continents and generations. Back in Seattle, I worked with Cormac and Dina to plan our next move. This wasn't something we could take to the press immediately. The wrong leak, and the right people would go into hiding, destroying records on the way out. Instead, we planned a quiet storm. Cormac called a board meeting. It was supposed to be routine. Quarterly updates. Strategy rollouts. But as the room filled with Harristone's most powerful stakeholders, the walls began to close in. I stood before the boardroom, no longer a janitor, no longer the grieving son cleaning up after office parties. I was introduced as a compliance consultant, temporary, of course, but with full executive authorization. Then we dropped the hammer. Dina walked them through the history, quietly, formally. She displayed a selection of redacted documents on a screen, careful not to reveal identities but clear enough to implicate procedures. Artifacts. Transfers. Payments. And then I handed out envelopes to each board member. Inside, a list of accounts, offshore, domestic, shell foundations, everything. With signatures. Some board members sat back, stunned. Others paled. I recognized the guilty ones immediately, they weren't angry. They were calculating. Then Cormac stood up. This ends now, he said. Every piece comes back. Every name gets documented. We'll report this to the authorities on our terms, not theirs. And if any of you want to leave with your dignity, now's the time to start talking. It wasn't about arrests or public takedowns. That would have turned it into a media circus, and worst of all, delayed restitution. Instead, the plan was precise. Cormac coordinated with international cultural ministries, restitution agencies, and private investigators. One by one, every item was tracked, catalogued, and prepped for return. Families were contacted discreetly. Museums were notified. The Ambridge Foundation's U.S. operations were frozen under IRS investigation after we anonymously leaked their tax records. Julius Fry? He was summoned to testify as part of a civil probe, his assets frozen pending investigation. It wasn't jail time, but it was worse for a man like him. He'd built his life on illusion and control. We took both away. Aldrich, still awaiting trial, reached out through his attorney. An apology letter was offered, thinly veiled as a plea for leniency. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His reputation was gone. His private consulting offers had dried up. The last I heard, he was running logistics for a third-tier insurance firm in Omaha. Karma, with interest. But the best part? The final ledger we released, the one with the symbol from the chapel, was published anonymously in a European archive. It went viral among restitution researchers. Universities began referencing it. A handful of prominent families, including the descendants of the original painting's owners, filed formal claims. One even contacted me personally to say thank you. I never put my name on the files. Neither did my parents. This wasn't about legacy. It was about making things right. One morning, about 4 months later, I opened my mailbox to find a small package. No name, no return address. Inside, a familiar gold pocket watch. The one from our shop in Boise. The one that had been left behind during the break-in. But this one had something different. Inside the case, scratched delicately beneath the hands, were 2 words, "Nice move." They were still watching. Still safe. Still proud. I locked the shop back in Boise for good that spring. Transferred ownership to a local historical society. Set up a scholarship fund in my parents' name for students researching art history and cultural restitution. And as for me? I declined Cormac's offer to stay on permanently. I'd had enough of boardrooms and polished lies. Instead, I joined Dina and a small team of independent researchers, helping families reconnect with pieces of their past. Quietly. Precisely. No headlines. No applause. Just justice. And that, finally, was enough.